One of the takeaways that I've heard a lot of folks on the left articulate about what we should do differently going forward, given that Trump won the election, and I think it's a good one. I don't necessarily think one made the difference in the election. I've talked about the more structural things that I think decided this one, but we should reach out more to audiences that we aren't reaching out to, meet people where they are. And sometimes that means going on more center-right networks or centrist, but more meaningfully than any of that is on podcasts. People talk about the podcast bros on podcasts that aren't political shows. Like I have a political podcast, not that, but are shows that dabble in politics. So an example of this is a Joe Rogan podcast, for example. It's not a political podcast. He talks about all sorts of things, but politics comes up. And Trump went on that Logan Paul podcast, the Andrew Schultz podcast, Theo Vaughn, I think. And a lot of folks who, the Full Send guys, the Nelk Boys podcast, people who aren't political figures, but they'll interview some. Because what that does is it appeals to audiences of people who aren't keeping up with politics as much, but some of them may vote. And so a little bit goes a long way because they're not hearing much about politics. So one podcast, a couple conversations could make a big difference. And I came across a post on X from Micah Irfan who said, send this man on every podcast for the next 4 years and we'll win all 50 states. And it's a video of Pete Buttigieg. And it reminded me that we haven't gone over, I went over one of the clips on a bonus show before the election, but this Jubilee video that was Pete Buttigieg going on a channel called Jubilee, and a bunch of Trump sympathetic people sat down and debated with him or asked him questions. And Pete Buttigieg, as one of the best communicators that we have on our quote unquote side, did a really great job. And I want to walk through these clips as an example of how valuable it'd be if he would bring this message to a bunch of just random bro podcasts or podcasts of different sorts that dabble in politics, but aren't necessarily debate shows for political subjects. And it's something that I'm going to be making an effort to do. For example, we're going to publish pretty soon an interview I did with a Trump supporter who doesn't have an overtly political podcast, but definitely touches on it. While you watch this, please do click the subscribe button. This first thing is on free speech, and this was before the election, so you'll hear the comparison. I know that's sort of since now Trump won, but the arguments are still very valid and relevant.
And it's Grace.
Grace, good night.
Frankly, I'm shocked that you would make that claim. I think I would love to know what the basis of that is, some specific examples.
Yeah.
Starting with freedom of speech.
Sure.
If
okay,
you could.
let's start with freedom of speech. So Donald Trump has said that he wants to revoke the licenses of television networks that have broadcast coverage that he disagrees with. I can't think of a more direct attack on the freedom of speech than a government official or a wannabe government official saying, I want to punish a television network because of their journalism, right? So that's how I feel about free speech. There's also more personal rights, a woman's right to choose, my right to have this ring on my finger, that I feel are much more secure if she's in charge than if he's in charge.
And the evidence you have of Donald Trump being against gay marriage or wanting to roll back protections for gay folks to be married is what exactly?
The evidence is that he ran for president with a platform that specifically said in black and white that they were against marriage equality.
And like this is today.
So they've kind of rubbed that out of the platform since the last time he ran for president, but the people he put on the court are contributing to a majority that already took away a woman's right to choose and doesn't seem very interested in protecting my right to marry, nor did he.
And all of these clips you'll see, some of it's about the substance, but we've discussed the substance of almost all these things, or all of them, before. So you don't necessarily need to hear me go through again how Trump said the government should go after MSNBC and how Trump does not care about free speech, given his record and what he's just posted on Truth Social and left up for us to see. You don't need to hear that again. But I am interested in examining the style and why we all agree that Pete Buttigieg is so effective rhetorically, and how I can have takeaways that I bring onto shows where I'm trying to make a difference between now and future elections, and what other people can do. And I think one of the things that makes him so compelling is that it's all so thoughtful and non-aggressive. I've gotten better at this, but I used to come in just swinging in every conversation, right? I was aggressive because I was thinking debate mode. And some settings, like when I go on Piers Morgan, everyone just shouts over you, so you kind of got to jump in and start talking really quickly. But in a lot of others, like on the Digital Social Hour that we'll publish soon with Sean Kelly, who does support Trump, he said, I took a much softer approach like Pete Buttigieg is doing here. Because I think a lot of people are fine hearing oppositional views, but if it feels like you're attacking them, their ears turn off. So that's one takeaway I think watching these clips brings up. Then a gentleman sits down and asks about crime and how people feel like it's spiking. Pete Buttigieg correctly points out, as I have many, many times, that it's going way, way down. And this is something that Sean Kelly and I examined as well.
On crime, I see a lot of Republican advertising statements, etc., that crime is out of control, that we've got immigrants that are causing all these things. And the statistics are clearly showing that this is not the trend, that they're trending downward. Yet I see very little pushback from the Harris side about putting those claims aside. I just don't see any really strong challenge to those claims. And that's a big issue for a lot of Americans. What is Kamala going to do?
Challenging those claims is part of what I'm trying to do right now.
Right.
Because I think we now live in an environment where people don't just have their own opinions, they kind of get their own facts. And that's especially true if you get information from a different TV network and different Twitter feeds or whatever than someone else. One of the reasons, even though I'm obviously left of center, I go on a conservative network like Fox a lot, is that I know their viewers might literally have no idea that crime is down. Now, let me also say something that's really important, which is if it's happened to you, if you've just been victimized by a crime, you don't care what the statistics are, right? Like for you, it's a crime wave. And we got to respect that and recognize that. And at the same time, it's clearly true that if you look at something like the homicide rate, it went up when he was in power. It went down after Donald Trump got beat. And just as importantly, it's way lower than it was when I was growing up in the 90s. In just about every major city, we've seen violent crime go down, and that appears to be continuing. And I think it's really important to talk about, not just is that true or is it isn't, it's true. What would it take to keep it going that way? Because what if it goes the other way? Then what happens, right? I also think, though, sometimes good news is no news. In other words, the better something is going, the harder it is to break through the noise with it, especially with the...
So true. And a great question from the guy there. Dishonesty is the real answer. Why am I not hearing these things on a lot of other networks? Well, because it doesn't fit the agenda. But it's also it's a less sinister point that Pete Buttigieg made, which is that a lot of people don't cover things if it's just a good thing. And I get that. I make a real effort to make sure you all are informed on things by weaving into other stories positive metrics whenever they exist so that you know about them, crime being one of them or the economic stuff. And some of that just comes in the form of arguments. I'm going to bring that up if we're talking about which side has a better record on this thing or that thing. But it actually takes a lot of effort because even the way that a lot of stories are presented on platforms is this really oppositional clickbait type of way. And that on social media is the same phenomenon as what drives ratings on cable news. And so everyone is then fueling an environment where you're mainly hearing about bad news, and the good news, as he said, is no news. And let's get to the clip that Micah clipped, because it's not a super sexy topic, but it's so important. And this that Pete Buttigieg outlines is the perfect example of you wouldn't hear a Fox News headline about it because it doesn't fit their agenda, and it's not super salacious. It's not fear-mongering about some story about an undocumented immigrant. And so many people are going uninformed.
Another one, this might sound a little weird, but the water infrastructure So there's actually very direct research that shows that if you have more kids exposed to lead, you run the clock out 15 years, you'll see higher crime rates because the developmental issues that they experience through lead poisoning lead them to be more likely to be justice involved. There's like a hugely strong correlation, right? So replacing all the lead pipes is not sexy. I think is actually one of the best things we can do that will lead to a safer society and less crime. Granted, that's not something you're seeing in the data, like, from one year to the next year. But I do think, by the time my kids are entering the workforce, like that will have had a big impact. So these are things piece by piece that you think about when you come into office and get up every day trying to make other people better off. And that's what I think she does. That's what I know she does because I know her. And that's not what I believe he does. And that's why I think it's really important not just to not vote for him, but to vote for her.
Yeah, and America made the wrong decision on that there. But that's the other thing. As social media incentivizes outrage and engagement, and as other forms of media do as well, you then have a feedback loop where the politicians more and more, care about implementing policies that bolster those sexy, salacious media narratives. For example, Trump's whole thing has been fear-mongering about undocumented immigrants while encouraging Republicans to block solutions to border problems. And so now he's coming in office, and one of his big goals is doing a really logistically unsound and problematic mass deportation plan, because that serves the narrative he was pushing for political purposes. But there are all these things that you have to rely on good leaders to be focused on that won't give them political points, that you won't see the outcome of until they're long out of office, as Buttigieg pointed out. But good leaders would do it anyways because they're actually trying to help people. And a more informed electorate could at least encourage leaders in their own self-interest, even if they weren't just really good people, to do it because we'll reward them even if it's not super salacious and in our face and we'll hear about it all over the media. But we're going the opposite direction on that, where people are more and more just thinking about trans bathroom issues and not about some systemic foundational stuff that we could all agree on implementing policy solutions on. Then you have this.
Same here.
You do good.
So I want to play devil's advocate a little bit, just to poke or chicky-chat your brain a little bit. Okay. When you are looking at things such as, I believe, multiple assassination attempts on Donald Trump, looking at things where he's walked into a position where he has experienced really awful media conversation about him, putting him in horrible lights, comparing him to Hitler, et cetera, justified or not, either way it's happening. And I would say things more on that line when I would say he's made his life harder by running not only once, but losing and then running again. He's been in politics for multiple years now. How do you look at that and then determine he's in it for himself when I would say he's made his life a lot more difficult? I mean, he's a billionaire. He could be sitting up playing golf.
So, yeah, no, look, I've heard this argument. Here's what I'd say. First of all, he's made a lot of money off of the presidential campaign. He hasn't just made money by being in business. Matter of fact, if you took the money he inherited and just put it in the stock market, it would be about the same. Okay. So most of what he's done in his business career has been destroying shareholder value. But leaving that aside, once he became president, there was a ton of self-dealing going on, right? Folks staying at his hotels who might have had interests before the government that he was running, members of his family cutting deals, including overseas, that they probably wouldn't have been able to cut if they weren't related to the President of the United States. Now, I get what you're saying, that anybody who gets into public service, anybody who puts their name on the line, anybody who runs for president, takes on a lot of negativity that comes with that. At a different level, I've experienced the negativity of being in public service. My husband and I worry sometimes about our family just because we're out there, and nobody should have to experience that. And one thing we should be able unequivocally to agree on is that nobody should ever accept political violence, no matter who it's directed at and no matter why, right? It is categorically unacceptable, wrong, and disgusting for there to have been an attempt on the life of any political candidate, including him, right? I still think, though, that he didn't do this because he woke up and thought, I'm going to make some sacrifices to help other people.
And he rounds out that point, but you get it. And well said. and a lot of Trump supporters, I do think, are misled about Trump's intentions. Also, someone like Trump, you have to see, even if you don't agree with this being the case with him, just because he could have played golf all the time. And since the beginning of man, people have really wanted power. And power is very intoxicating. And so the fact that he was rich and had a comfortable life before running for office doesn't mean he wouldn't have run for office for himself because he desperately wanted more power and relevance, which has been the pursuit of his entire life, okay? And then he's leveraged his power for himself over and over and over again. I'll leave it there. Let me know. Do you agree? We got to reach out more. We got to meet people where they are. And messengers like Pete Buttigieg are just the people to do it. Go to the side camera. You can tell me in the comments. And get the bonus show if you want to support the work we do by clicking that join button below.